Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Today we are going to visit Paris, armchair traveling. The person who will be our tour guide is Kathy Borrus. You see her standing in front of a photo, one of the views of Notre Dame. Kathy is an author, a consummate shopper, world traveler, and she has written several books about Paris, which you see here. But we are going to be talking about things in a slightly different way. So let me take care of my housekeeping announcements, and then we will get right to Kathy's slide presentation. My name is Wendy Cromash. I am representing the Levy Senior Center Foundation, a wonderful 501c3 in Evanston. We help seniors. We enhance programming at the Levy Senior Center, and it's a wonderful organization. I would encourage you to join and to keep us in mind when you are making your financial donations, your philanthropic donations later this year. I also want to thank our corporate sponsor, Abidar. Abidar is a new building, apartment rentals in Evanston, downtown Evanston. It's a block away from the new location of the Northlight Theater. It's the perfect place for people who are in transition, if you are downsizing from a house and you're not sure what your next step is, if you just want to keep renting in a beautiful location after downsizing from a house, or if you are in an apartment you don't like and want to change. It's a great location, beautiful building. Everything is brand new. Apartments start at $1,885, $1,885 a month, which is, I can tell you, much less. I was paying for a one-bedroom apartment in New York, so I don't know what Chicago rents are, but it sounds like a good deal, and they're lovely people, brand new. Enjoy stress-free living in downtown Evanston. Apartment homes for 55 plus. Call 847-512-4232. Let's see. I also want to talk to you about our wonderful long sleeve, 100% cotton Levy Senior Center t-shirts. They're $15 each. If you live locally, I will deliver it for you. If you live outside of the area, and I will be happy to mail it to you. Right now, our inventory, we have one small t-shirt left, and we have a good supply of larges and extra larges. But I think this is a good thing, because the larges and the extra larges are long enough so that ladies can wear these with capri pants or leggings. If you're just staying home, put on a pair of sweats. They're cozy. You will be very happy with yours. So think about it. $15, and it benefits the Levy Senior Center Foundation. I will be sending a short survey out at the end of the lecture, in between coming up to toward the end of the slideshow, before the Q&A. If you have a couple of minutes, please fill it out. You do need to answer each question in the survey. They're not hard questions. And then at the end, go to the bottom where you'll see a send button, and you need to click that. I see someone has raised their hand. I do not have access to the hand feature here. I can't respond. If you need to reach me, use the Q&A, please. Q&A will be if you have questions about things that you want answered, toward the end of the presentation, during the Q&A session, please send them to me in the Q&A. And I think that's it. I am going to remove myself from the screen, and Kathy will take over introducing you to her favorite haunts in Paris. Some of them you may know of, some of them maybe completely.
Oops. It just froze.
Q&A.
My screen just froze.
You are not frozen to me.
Hi. Okay, good. Did you introduce me? I'm sorry.
Yes, I said that you are a world traveler, consummate
Yes.
shopper, and an expert on Paris based on the books that you've written.
Okay, hello everyone, and greetings from Washington, D.C. Despite the little bit of Paris in the background, I am in D.C. I just want to thank everyone for Zooming in today, and especially for Wendy for organizing the lecture, and to my good friend Judy Newton, who suggested I talk about one of my most favorite cities in the world, Paris. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of background on how I came to know Paris and write these books, and then move on to the slideshow. And I worked for the Smithsonian doing buying, and I was merchandise manager for the museum stores for 20 years, from the mid-70s to the 90s. And in that capacity, I bought all over the world for 25 museum stores in 12 different Smithsonian buildings, museums, and traveled around the world, as Wendy said. And after I left the Smithsonian, I was still doing consulting for museum stores and nonprofits and groups that do development in third world countries, because I did a lot of product development when I worked for the Smithsonian. And
Kathy, I'm just going to interrupt for a second. Could you speak a little bit louder, please?
I will do the best I can. Can you hear me now?
Yes, just you're so soft-spoken, but
okay, I'll try to be louder.
Okay.
Okay. So after I left the Smithsonian, I didn't have any particular obligations. I was doing consulting for museum stores and nonprofits, but I did what I always wanted to do. My son was off in college, and I took myself to Paris for a month. I always wanted to spend time there. And after I had a great time, after I came back, I happened to be at a wholesale book trade show talking to a publisher that did a lot of books for us at the Smithsonian. And I was enthusiastically telling him about my month in Paris and how a month was simply not enough. And he handed me a book called 1,000 Buildings of New York. And he said, the next one is Paris. And I very naively raised my hand and said, I'll do it. I had a background in art history. So he knew that I had written books before. After I left the Smithsonian, I wrote this book called The Fearless Shopper. Came out in 2000. It's all about looking at shopping as a way to explore cultures. So we did a little negotiation, and off I went to Paris. I had the help of a few experts in Paris, plus a young man who was an architect and is an architect and getting a PhD in the history of architecture when I wrote this. This came out it's all about the architecture, the history, or just a good story about each of the 1,000 buildings. And I spent 6 months living in Paris, exploring every region. In 2010, the publisher called and said he wanted to turn his books into paperback. And so we turned it into 500 Buildings of Paris. And ever since I wrote these 2 books, I have spent about a month a year in Paris. About a week after last year's fire at Notre Dame, which was April 15th, and a week before I was planning to spend the month of Paris with my boyfriend, I got a call from the publisher, and they said they wanted to do a picture book with text celebrating the cathedral. And again, I naively said, I'll do it. The catch was it had to be done in 5 weeks. Well, I spent most of the month last year working on discovering Notre Dame. So I'm going to begin by, and by the way, if anyone wants to know more about that or ask me questions in the Q&A, in the interest of time, since this is a trip around Paris, I will just give you a little introduction and begin with a simple map and how Paris is organized by 20 arrondissements or districts. And if you see, they start in the center of Paris. This blue line is the Seine, the river that runs through Paris. And I'm going to take you, it's organized clockwise, kind of looks like a snail, that's how it's described, and gets larger as you go out into the far reaches of Paris. Most of what people see if they're first-time visitors is they tend to stay in the center of Paris. I'm just, as Wendy said, going to hit on a few of the highlights that tourists usually go to. I understand that some of you have been to Paris several times and others only haven't been at all. So just to give you a sense of organization, this is what Paris looks like, and started on this little island where Notre Dame is. So there is also an addition, which is La Défense, which I will talk briefly about as well. And I want to start with 4 buildings that I consider the icons of Paris. They're in every tourist guide, so I'm not going to spend too much time talking about them. And what I'm going to do is start with them and take you to some of the neighborhoods around these icons. And I'm going to start in the 7th. Now remember, Paris, the central part of Paris is kind of over here to the east. And the Eiffel Tower starts in the 7th, is in the 7th, very close to the Seine. And the reason I'm starting with this is, instead of at the beginning of the first arrondissement, is I'm often asked what my favorite building in Paris is. Well, I have several, but I have to say the Eiffel Tower, as cliche as it may be, is absolutely one of my favorites. And because it's so industrial, but so elegant at the same time. It is 1,000 feet high, a little bit more than that. If you stack 3 football fields vertically, you about get the height of it. It's made of 7,300 tons of wrought iron, 2.5 rivets, 18,000 prefabricated parts. It is the quintessential symbol of Paris and the most recognizable around the world, which is another reason why I'm starting here. But in its day, it was built 1887 to 89 for the World Exposition. In its day, it had a lot of critics. There are always critics in Paris. It was called an awful tower, a truly tragic street lamp, and a whole riddled suppository, among other things. On opening day, the elevator broke. A lot of the city officials did not climb, but Gustave Eiffel climbed all 1,665 steps. I love this building. It was supposed to be only exist for 20 years, and Eiffel made it a science tower, a broadcast tower, and so it has remained, as I said, the quintessential symbol of Paris. And what I'm going to do is take you across, okay. So the Eiffel Tower is in the 7th. I'm going to take you across the bridge to an area that a lot of tourists don't know about. It happens to be in the 16th arrondissement. And what you see here is an aerial view from the Eiffel Tower of Trocadero, which is one of the 7 hills of Paris. And it's an enormous space. It has fountains, it has gardens, an aquarium, several museums. This is the Palais de Chaillot. And they're rotating exhibits, and there's a lot of sculpture. You can hang out in the gardens if you have kids. There's a merry-go-round. It's a beautiful space, and it has a wonderful view. I told you I loved the Eiffel Tower. Whether it's at dusk in the rain, I caught a reflection, or from the Palais, You can see a wonderful view of the Eiffel Tower. And in 1940, when Hitler was in Paris, he stood about in the same place with the Eiffel Tower in the background. And on VE Day, May 8th, 1945, the US Army in Paris celebrated the victory in the same spot. There's a view you don't see very often. They left all the construction material and the barges. This is the west of Paris. Paris isn't always pretty. What you're looking at is a view from the 16th with 15th high rises, but it is Paris. And the reason I'm taking you here, because it's very close to Trocadero, and you see this island in the middle of Paris. Mostly locals are on it. It's a man-made island, and it's little more than a half mile, but it's a great place to exercise and work. Swan Island, though I haven't seen any swans around there when I've jogged by, except once in 2016, there was one swan when Paris was flooded. And from here at the tip, on the western tip, you see a familiar sight. It's the Statue of Liberty. It's the quarter scale. And in this area, incidentally, is a lot of workout. There's a climbing wall and other workout machines, bicycles. There happen to be 4 Statue of Liberties in Paris. This one used to face east to the Eiffel Tower. It now faces west to its mate in New York. And there's a plaque that recognizes both American Independence Day and Bastille Day. And I want to point out, there are 4, there's Statue of Liberty in Luxembourg Gardens, which was moved to the entrance of Musée d'Orsay. There's a replica now back at Luxembourg Gardens and in the Arts and Métiers Museum. And there is a life-size flame near the Champs-Élysées, very close to the tunnel where Princess Diana died. And it's sort of become an unofficial memorial. You will notice this building right here, Radio France, which is just across the bridge. The bridge links the 15th with the 16th. So it's very accessible. And Radio France, this is the part of the interior, it's a great place to see concerts. What they do is give live performances and then they broadcast them. It's also architecturally very interesting. This is just a little view from inside. I highly recommend it. The tickets are relatively inexpensive and it's pretty easy to get a ticket. It's just south of Trocadero. I'm gonna go back to the first now, to the Louvre. It's had many incarnations. The buildings started in 1190 and there've been modifications over the years. In 1984, I.M. Pei built the pyramid, which again, a lot of Parisians were highly critical of, but it has also become a symbol and a tourist attraction and the entrance to the museum. It's had many incarnations. It's been a former defense tower, a royal residency, repository for the crown treasures, an artist commune. It was the first royal library, a Renaissance palace, and now a museum, of course. And a place for various people to congregate. And in this case, in 2016, a French artist, J.R., he is a street artist, created a monumental optical illusion. And I just happened upon it because a friend of mine and her daughter were helping him put these photosensitive sheets that covered the pyramid. It perfectly aligned with the building's arches. And of course, the Louvre is now one of the icons of Paris. So very close to Paris is the site of a former home of Catherine de' Medici. And it is now the Bourse du Commerce. It's a grain market. Louis XVI established it as a grain market in 1765. Catherine de' Medici lived on the site. This is a column where they supposedly, it's called the Medici column, and they supposedly did astrology here. And you also see its dome, which Victor Hugo wrote about and called it an English jockey cap on a large scale. So many of you have probably heard of Hotel Ritz. It was an artist's home in 1705. It's become a celebrity hotel, and it's most popular for its legendary bar. A lot of literary association with this hotel and the bar. Fitzgerald wrote about it in Tender as the Night. It's been written in Babylon Revisited, The Bridal Party. It's been in museums. This is the Hemingway bar, the legendary watering hole. This is a picture of Fitzgerald, who also was there quite often. But in 1944, Hemingway liberated soldiers with 93 rounds of dry martinis. So the legend goes. It's also been in films. It's been in films like Funny Face, How to Steal a Million, and The Devil Wears Prada. There's a Coco Chanel suit and a John Elton suite as well. So close by and behind the Louvre, about a block away or so, is Palais Royal. It was originally built in 1620. What you're looking at here is an art installation by Daniel Barron from 1986. It's been many things also. It was the private home of Cardinal Richelieu. It had revolving occupants. The Sun King played on the grounds here. Was apartment buildings where Cocteau and Colette lived. They waved to each other. It was a place of sinners and saints, chess players, duelers, prostitutes, revelers, and it's pretty tranquil now. And it's a great place in the gardens to just have a nice rest from all your visiting. And I just want to tell you a little story about this Petite Cannon. It was put there in 1786, bronze, placed on the Meridian line, and with a magnifying glass, they used the sun to ignite the fuse, and it rang out at noon, and you could set your watch by it. It stopped in 1914, was restored and resumed in 1980. There was a 1998 theft, and then a replacement in 2002. And in 2010, they revived the tradition of lighting it at noon. It's beautiful gardens. And just very close by is the Ministry of Culture, which is also in the Palais Royal. This is, if you're into architecture, Francis Solé took a 19th century classical building and covered it with this contemporary addition, this lattice-like metallic screen. On a gray day, the covering disappears into the sky. On a bright day, it glows. It's worth a visit just to see it, because it's one of those things where you're walking down the street and you say, huh, what is that? Inside, you can get cultural information. So we're going to move to the second, again, very close to the Louvre. The center of Paris is very walkable. And in the 19th century, in its heyday, there were about 150 covered passages. Now there's only about a dozen. It was especially wonderful in the rain. In the 19th centuries, it was a place to see and be seen. This was originally built in 1823. And also, gentlemen had to have their boots scraped of the dirt and the muck before they came in. It's a registered historic monument, 1974. And I highly recommend it. It is fun to see. It houses also purportedly the oldest bookstore in Paris. And as I said, sometimes you're walking down the street in Paris, you see all these 19th century buildings, and all of a sudden, something like this pops up. And this is the Tower of John the Fearless, Tour de Jean Sans Peur, built in 1409 to 11. Get a good example of feudal architecture. He built this because he ordered the assassination of his cousin, Philip de Orleans, and he was afraid someone was going to kill him. So, whoops, sorry about that. He ran up the stairs and was guarded and hid so no one would kill him. Unfortunately, about the spiral staircase didn't help because about 11 years later, he was assassinated on a bridge. Now, if you're into movies or concerts,
Kathy,
yeah.
just go back for a sec. And
this is a mannequin dressed of the time, by the way. That's not me. It is a museum you can visit. You froze. I can't hear anything.
Just it's a mannequin.
Yes.
Not a real.
Not a real person.
Not a real person, right?
Yes. Yes. And the spiral staircase leading up to the tower. Go on.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
And just FYI, it's we're at the halfway mark timing wise, so just keep that in mind.
They speed up a little. This is the Rex, an Art Deco landmark silver screen, was at the time in 1932 the largest in all of Europe. It has a wonderful Art Deco marquee and a very Baroque interior. The screen is 60 feet high, 40 feet wide. There's multiple screens, and you could see concerts and movies here. And in the second is a historic street, Rue Mortegoy. It's filled with visitors and tourists these days. But this restaurant here, Rocher de Cancale, opened in 1804. Such notables as Alexander Dumas, Balzac, aristocrats mixed with prostitutes, they all gathered there. You can eat there now. It's open if you love snails. Down the street is L'Escargot, and Monet even painted the street. This is purported to be the oldest house. We've moved into the third. It's the oldest house in Paris, and Nicolas Flamel was a scribe, best known after his death as an alchemist who developed the philosopher's stone, turning lead into gold. And Victor Hugo used it as, Victor Hugo used it in The Hunchback of Notre Dame. It was in the movie Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, and also Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code. This is Jewish Museum in the third as well, and it's got a great collection inside, not only the history of Judaism with Torah scrolls and paintings. There's paintings by Chagall, Modigliani. It's devoted to Jewish heritage, and it was converted to a museum in 1986. Had been a town hall where Napoleon and Josephine were married. No, civil ceremony. So we have been in Le Marais, which is in the third and the fourth arrondissement. Many guidebooks tell you about Place Vosges, which was the royal palace. Henry IV built it in 1605. It's a perfect square with a long, long history. It's now apartment buildings, restaurants, art galleries, and a lovely park. You may have heard of Rue de Rossier. That is the Jewish street where there used to be a lot of Jewish delis. In the fourth, one of the most famous, which is still there, is Las Falafel. And if you love falafels, you can take out or eat inside the restaurant. And nearby, there is the Victor Hugo House and Picasso Museum. They're in all the guidebooks. So we come to my next icon of Paris, Notre Dame, which has become, through history, really an eyewitness to history, a secular, religious, and cultural symbol of Paris. Victor Hugo once said, "Great edifices, like great mountains, are the work of centuries." It is in the center of France, from which all distances are measured. And you can see the scaffolding. This is a picture I took after the fire. It's on the island where Paris was started, Ile de la Cité. This took 200 years to build, and there were modifications, renovations over the centuries. I'm just going to tell you quickly my favorite story that involves the revolution. Across the western facade, the other image was the backside of the back of Notre Dame with gardens. There are 28 gallery, it's the Gallery of Kings. There are 28 kings of Judah. But during the revolution, the revolutionaries mistaken them for the kings of France. And so they decapitated all of them. And they turned it into, they decimated Notre Dame. Besides beheading the kings, they melted all the bells except for one to turn them into cannonballs, destroyed the spire. They turned it into a wine and food warehouse, and dubbed it the Temple of Reason, dedicated to liberty, equality, and fraternity. And a little incidental story is in 1977, when workers were restoring a bank in the 9th arrondissement, they uncovered 21 of the 28 kings with their heads beside them. They're now in the Cluny Museum. So after the revolution, from the 1790s through the 1820s, Paris, Notre Dame was an absolute mess, and it was almost going to be sold off. But two people saved it, in my opinion. Victor Hugo, who wrote Notre Dame de Paris, which Hollywood turned into The Hunchback of Notre Dame. And the critics hated it. There were a lot of chapters on its architecture and life, the ambience of life in Middle Ages in Paris. As I said, the critics hated it. It was wildly popular with the public. It was published in 1831 and republished, printed several times in the 30s. And as a result of that, there was an arts commission established, and Viollet-le-Duc and a partner were the architects who won the competition. I think he was an incredible visionary, and I could talk for an hour on just him alone. He replaced the damaged sculptures, updated the flying buttresses, and added a higher spire. In my opinion, he was, as I said, quite the visionary, and I'm happy to speak about him more. But in the interest of time, we are moving on. This is Hotel de Sully in the 4th, has a kind of dicey past. It's typical of architecture with a courtyard from the 1600s. And the first owner squandered his money with gambling, and a duke bought it. And the old duke loved dancing in the courtyard with women of ill repute. But he had a great sense of equality, because he built his young wife a separate passage for her and her lovers. And we've moved into the 5th district. This is the Arab Institute built by Jean Nouvel in a collaboration. And it has a split facade, which is very interesting. North is glass, the south is aluminum, which is what you're looking at here. It has mechanized panels that open and shut like the aperture of an old camera. And the aluminum varies the shadows, giving it a lattice-like effect. And by the way, it has a wonderful museum store inside. The Hemingway House in 1922, Hemingway lived here with his wife, Hadley. And in A Movable Feast, he describes it as a tiny walk-up flat on the 4th floor, no running water, and they used a toilet on the landing, which was typical in the 1920s. He refers to it as an antiseptic container, not uncomfortable to anyone who has used a Michigan outhouse. There are many market streets in Paris. This one, in fact, they're in every neighborhood. Sometimes there's more than one. This one happens to be open all the time. Vendors spill out into the street, and it's fun to just walk down the street because every market in Paris has a different ambiance. And before I leave the fifth, I have to tell you about Brian and the Abbey bookstore. It's an 18th century old building and a historic monument. The facade, it's an English bookstore. And Brian, despite the way it looks, Brian can find any book you ask him for that's in his store. Hard to believe. So we're moving into the sixth, and you may recognize Saint-Sulpice. Hemingway, it is a literary connection, of course. Hemingway sat in a cafe that's still there, across from Saint-Sulpice, and gazed at the Four Bishops fountain. It was also the scene of the gruesome murder in Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code. So in the sixth, just to orient you, here's another street market that is wonderful. Here is Luxembourg Garden, which is usually on everyone's tourist list. And the market is walkable. It's a great Sunday morning market. You can buy gifts for everyone here. In the southwest corner, just about a 5-minute walk right over, cursor, right around here, is Musée Zatkin. It's a very small house museum. It was his studio also. He lived here from 1928 to 67, more or less, except for the war years when, because he was half Jewish, he went to the United States, and his wife hid his bronzes in the cellars around different homes. He came back afterwards, and it's a lovely little museum to visit, especially if you like Cubism. And in the seventh, not too far away, is the first modern department store in Paris, and the only one on the left bank. This gentleman here became a partner in 1852, and the gross sales went from 500,000 francs to 5 million in 12 years. Even if you don't want to buy anything, it's a beautiful structure to take a look at. And across the street is a food hall that is owned by them as well. And if you've heard of Charlotte Gainsbourg, this is her father. He was singer-songwriter, son of Jewish immigrants. He was born in Paris. And during World War II, they used forged papers and spent the war years in Limoges. But he's best known to be a singer-songwriter, provocateur. He had Brigitte Bardot as one of his lovers and various other ones. He loved to shock and please audience. After he died in 1991, his house, which is an 18th century building, became a cult attraction, and fans regularly visit there, write him messages and graffiti. The city periodically whitewashes it. His fans come back and write more graffiti. And this is the glass house. It is now owned by an American, but it was built in 1931 for a gynecologist. And there are only pictures of the outside. It's Art Deco industrial construction. But inside, which I cannot show you because photographs are not permitted, is a fascinating tour. But you have to have a connection to architecture, decoration. I wrote the book on Paris, so they would let me go in. It's a wonderful tour to take, and one of the fun with all sorts of interesting mechanisms inside. And there is one room with a glass where he made for his wife to overlook his examining table to make sure there was no hanky-panky going on. Now, the Musée d'Orsay is a fabulous building architecturally. I think many of you know it used to be an old train station. It now houses the Impressionist paintings, and there are always temporary exhibits going on. I'm not going to spend much time on here. It's a Beaux-Arts building from 1898 to 1900. It's definitely worth a visit. And across the river, so we were on the left bank, across the river, we're entering the 8th with a famous hotel. It had, and Place de, which is Hotel de Crillon, and it's in Place de Concorde. You can see it over here with the Egyptian obelisk. And it used to be in this square during revolutionary times, over 1,000 people were beheaded, including Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, and who incidentally were also married in the square. Well, it's pretty tranquil now. You can see there's sometimes a Ferris wheel, and this is the fountain of rivers, and you may recognize it because this is where there was a scene towards the end of the movie in Devil Wears Prada, where the character Andrea Sachs throws her phone into the fountain. So again, the Grand Palais and the Petit Palais, I'm just going to briefly mention because they are also definitely worth a visit. This is a stunning piece of Beaux-Arts architecture. This is the interior of the Grand Palais. This is the Petit Palais, also not so small, and the interior of the Petit Palais. And in the Grand Palais, there are often temporary exhibitions, and there's a permanent collection in the Petit Palais, and they also have temporary exhibitions, and they are right across the street from each other in the 8th. Also in the 8th, there are a lot of house museums. This one in particular is very interesting. It's the Musée Nissam de Camando. It has an 18th century collection of the family. They were Turkish Jews. The father bequeathed their entire collection to the city of Paris in 1935 on the condition that it was named after his son, Nissam, who died fighting for France in World War I. But unfortunately, tragically, the Vichy government forgot this act of patriotism and sent the family to Auschwitz in World War II. We're moving into the 9th Rue de Martyrs, and there's a story how Saint-Denis in the 3rd century under the Romans was decapitated and carried his head up the street. You see Sacré-Cœur in the distance. And the 9th arrondissement was very artistic in the 1830s to 1850. Writers, poets, intellectuals, actors, they all lived here. And 2 of the small houses in the 9th, right around the corner from each other and not far from that Market Street, which incidentally is an old Jewish quarter as well. So there are 2 small house museums. This belonged to painter Ari Schaefer. In 1830, he held Friday night gatherings here for the luminaries of the era of the Romantic period. Georges Sand, Chopin, Liszt, they all congregated here, and you can visit it, and you can see where Georges Sand lived. And this on the left is, I think, a crazy painter, Gustave Moreau. He was dubbed a painter's painter. He was a symbolist and did these phantasmagoric paintings. He was afraid that people would forget him after he died, which largely they did. So he gave his house and its furniture and all his paintings inside. Whoops. You can see the paintings are crammed wall to wall, and they're hung salon style. It is definitely worth a visit to see, but you may leave a little screaming like monks scream. It's so cluttered. So moving into the 10th, it was a very industrial area, sometimes not so safe. They expanded the railroad stations. This is Gare du Nord, and it was the gateway to the north. You can go to the Channel from here. And the interior, you may recognize, it's the spot where in the movie Amelie, the character of Audrey Tautou, had an almost chance encounter with the character Nino. And right down the street, less than a 5-minute walk away, is Gare de l'Est. It was enlarged several times between 1877 and 1931. Ironically, the increased space spent 100,000 French men to their death in World War I, and in World War II, it was tragically used to deport Jews to concentration camps. Just to the east and a 5-10 minute walk away it's actually between, this market is one of the covered markets, the largest covered market in Paris and one of the last original halls. It is between Gare du Nord and Gare de l'Est, and you can pick up some food and picnic on Canal Saint-Martin. It used to be a kind of dicey area. It's very tranquil now. A lot of tourists visit it, and you can see Alfred Sisley painted a view of it. And if you don't want to have a picnic, you can stop in at Gare du Nord, which has a few, at hotel rather. And hotel, by the way, means a house basically, and later became our meaning of a hotel. But there are a few rooms, but you can sit out on the banks and look at the Canal Saint-Martin, and you may recognize the facade from the 1938 film where actress Arletty spoke the words atmosphere, atmosphere, and there is plenty of atmosphere at the canal. And we're moving into one of the larger arrondissement, and Boulevard Richard Lenoir is quite large. There are constant markets there. One day I happened upon a Venice Carnival. There's a food market, clothing, all sorts of activities, even a merry-go-round for kids. On the left is Place de la République, where most of the strikes and demonstrations start out in Paris. And of course, this is the Bastille, where the revolutionaries had the prisoners escape. There were only 7 prisoners who escaped. That's all that was in the tower when they were there. And just to the left is the new Opera House. Also in the 11th is the Winter Circus, Cirque d'Hiver, which was built by Napoleon. It used to be called Cirque de Napoleon. And it's an oval polygon with 20 sides. And it was inspiration to painters such as Toulouse-Lautrec and Seurat. This was his last painting in 1891. They say it was unfinished. It looks finished to me. And this is a space that's fairly new, an old warehouse space with art immersion. It's really a fantastic place to see what they have done. I saw this Gustav Klimt exhibit here. It's in constant motion. Everything is changing. And last year they had one on Van Gogh. And the covered market, another covered market, local one, it's small and quaint. And it's just fun to visit something new, get a feel of the area. But this is an old viaduct in the 12th. And it was restored as a project in 1988. If you've been to the High Line in New York, it's similar. There's train tracks, train tracks above, and under the arches, there are all sorts of craft stores, art galleries, various shops, fashion stores as well. And the 12th, another train station, which took passengers from Paris to Lyon and Marseille. This is a very famous historic restaurant, Le Train Bleu, in the train station. And its name derives from the rapid train that went to Côte d'Azur. And even, it's a very expensive restaurant. I haven't eaten in there, but it's worth a peek to see the Belle Epoque dining hall. And in the 12th, we come to an old wine district where they used to unload the wine. These warehouses were changed to cafes, restaurants, art galleries. It's a pedestrian walkway. Right next door is Yitzhak Rabin Garden. It's a large park. There's plenty to do there, even a turtle pond, and you can spend the day at both of them. And if you cross the river, this is just across from Bercy Park, you come to the French National Library. It's like 4 open books, and you can go there. There are temporary exhibits there. And you've crossed into the 13th. And very close by is fairly new, the docks of Paris is a great place to hang out, see temporary exhibits. And it's also near the 5th, and you can walk to a zoo in the 5th. And it's the city of design and fashion. And it opens at noon, I believe, 10, and it's open till midnight. There are bars and cafes on the top, and it's fairly new. It's just a couple of years old. Strange to see something like this. You wouldn't guess it was Paris. It's in the 13th. It's on the historic registry. And artists Modigliani and Gauguin lived here, worked here, had their studios there. And you are in Montparnasse in the 14th with their famous cafes, Le Dôme and La Rotonde. When the artists left the Montmartre, they moved into Montparnasse. And sorry, I keep hitting the wrong button. And in the center, you see Modigliani, Picasso, and an art critic of the day in the I think that was 1916. So, and Montparnasse, this is one of the first high rises, the Tower of Montparnasse. There's a cemetery there. And a new museum that only opened just last year on the liberation of Paris. I haven't been there yet. Opened after I left Paris last May. And very close by is another market. There's a food market once a week. And on Sundays, there's a wonderful little local art market. A lot of it's pedestrian, but sometimes you find a gem, and I recommend it. This, believe it or not, is a church. If you're interested in architecture, it was the first church built in Paris since 1968. And in the 15th, very close to the train station at Montparnasse, is a museum and the former house of Antoine Bourdelle, who was a sculptor. And he was a student of Rodin's, and also he taught Giacometti and Matisse, though his name is not nearly as well known. But his house and studio have over 500 pieces of art, including his own collection of Delacroix, Ingres, and Rodin. And it's a nice little garden also. I'll just give you a taste of that. And I love these small museums. In the 16th, we're back in the 16th in a different part. This is Musée Balzac. Again, his house and collection. And he was always in debt, and he used to hide from his creditors here. And his housekeeper would only open the door if you knew such key phrases, such as, "The plum season has arrived," or "I'm bringing lace from Bruges." And then you could get past his housekeeper. He hid here from 1840 to 1847. And now we come to Castle Berenger, also in the 16th. It was called the eccentric house, the crazy house, the devil's house. It had, for its various design elements, the architect put his face in the balconies in ironwork. And you may recognize the name Hector Guimard. This is a house he lived in the 16th. This is a synagogue he did in the 4th. He is most famous for the Paris metros, their Art Nouveau design. And incidentally, there is one in the garden at MoMA, this part. Also on the 16th, another house museum if you're into Monet, and there's a beautiful garden, huge garden that many locals are in, not too many tourists, and the Jardin de Ranelagh. It's very tranquil now. It used to be a place where courtesans danced under the gas lights. And on the northern part is Fondation de Louis Vuitton. It is an art museum. I can't say much for his art collection, but the Frank Gehry architecture is spectacular. You can climb to the top and get a tour, plus a great view of Paris, including the Eiffel Tower. And there's a garden nearby. And I can't leave the 16th for you tennis fans. I am among them. Roland Garros is in the southern part of the 16th in Bois de Boulogne, and that is the master of clay, Rafa Nadal. And in bordering the 16th, 17th, and part of the 8th is the Arc de Triomphe. It's on the west end of Champs-Élysées. The only thing I want to say about this is you must climb to the top. It has a spectacular view of Paris. And in the 17th is another small house museum by painter Jean-Jacques Hennet, and it became a museum in 1924, and is quite interesting to see how they lived and their art collection. Also in the 17th is a quaint little area where Zola, Sicily, and Manet lived. You wouldn't expect it. It was agricultural, then industrial, and now, as I said, it's kind of quaint. And nearby is another food market and, and a very lively market street, Rue de Levy. And from a Boulevard de Batignolles, you can see Sacré-Cœur, which brings us into the 18th. And one of my last icons of Paris. It was built over a few centuries, also criticized as a whimsical plaything or a wedding cake. But the wonderful thing, I had an apartment very close by when I was writing the Paris book. And the interesting thing about its dome is that it cleans itself. It's made out of local calcite, white calcite. And when it rains, it gets brighter and whiter with each drop of rain. And of course, the 18th, Montmartre is famous for the Moulin Rouge, sorry, from 1889 is when it opened. It was actually founded by a butcher, and Toulouse-Lautrec pretty much made it famous along with the dancing can-can girls and the emerging sex industry. And incidentally, there is a museum of sex nearby. This is a famous small restaurant. You can still eat there. And it was a place where all the artists, Picasso, Modigliani, Apollinaire, it was a favorite haunt of theirs. And in 1910, there was a hoax by a critic who hated Cubism and modernism. And he took the owner's donkey, Lola, and attached a paintbrush to its tail, and it created this canvas, Sunset over the Adriatic, which was accepted into a modern art expo. This used to be a museum, perhaps they're renovating. There's only a plaque on the door now, but the musician Eric Satie lived here in a room so tiny he called it a closet. And in 1893, he had a love affair with painter model Suzanne Valadin, who lived next door. He used to write her love letters and talk about her exquisite eyes, gentle hands, tiny feet. He was obsessed with her, but she dumped him after 6 months. And she was a model and a painter in her own right. She was painted many times by various artists, by Renoir, by Toulouse-Lautrec, and others. And she was the first woman in 1894 to be admitted to the society, the National Society of Beaux-Arts. And these are some of her paintings actually in the United States. in the National Museum of Women in the Arts. This one's in the Met and the Houston Fine Arts Museum. And you can visit her home. It's on a sort of nondescript opening on a small, narrow road in Montmartre Street. But the back side of it is gorgeous. It's a garden. Here is Café Renoir. You can have a cup of coffee on the grounds. Inside, you can visit her home and studio, and lots of other paintings. It tells you the history of Montmartre in paintings. It's a wonderful museum. And it has gorgeous gardens and also a winery behind it. Montmartre was the highest of the 7 hills of Paris. And also in the 18th, under Barbès Metro, this is the metro, is a fabulous market. It's the liveliest, the least expensive market. I suggest you take your wallet, keep your hands in your pocket. It's very crowded and gives you a sense of being in the third world. And the 19th is Parc de la Villette. It used to be an abattoir, which is now, this is an old picture of it. Slaughterhouse, it's now a cultural center. They have trade fairs there, exhibits. This is the Museum of Science and Industry with a geodesic dome, but my favorite part is the Philharmonie de Paris. The outside, the building itself was developed by French architect Jean Nouvel, and it's an exhibit space on the first floor and a fabulous concert hall. I've heard several concerts here over the years. It's got great acoustics. And I saw a wonderful exhibit here a few years ago on David Bowie. So museum. And it's also nearby houses the, in Parc de la Villette is a music museum, which you can use a headset and walk up to a case and you can hear the music being played. And a wonderful park in the 19th, it's the 5th largest park in Paris. And it's a lot to do, it's quite large. And we come to the 20th, we are almost through. You can't leave without visiting Père Lachaise Cemetery in the 20th. It's a celebrity cemetery. Jim Morrison's here, can't say much about his grave. It's very dull except for the trinkets people leave him. Oscar Wilde's grave, which is right here, is very flamboyant, as was he, an Egyptian winged deity. Eloise and Abelard, the real life French Romeo and Juliet, are buried here. As are Molière, Sarah Bernhardt, Chopin, Gertrude Stein, Colette, Balzac. He also used it in his, oops, and I'm sorry, but there's a great little story about this man here, Victor Noir, who was a 19th century Parisian journalist. And he was a ladies' man killed by a jealous lover. And this noticeable bulge here, for some reason, has become a fertility symbol, and everybody seems to want to rub it. The 20th is also famous for Edith Piaf and Marie Chevalier. She is also buried at, in the cemetery there. And it was a working class area for a very long time. It's now become young, hip, and arty. And this is also in the 20th. Turkish restaurant, it used to be. It's another quaint area you would not think of as being in Paris. And this is a museum you can visit on the weekends. And just to show you, there were odd buildings built that most Parisians didn't like, and a lot of high rises, which ruined the view of Paris. So they sent them all to La Défense. And I'm sorry. Here you see the Grand Arch, and La Défense is named after this statue, which was commemorates soldiers from 1883 died in defending Paris in the Franco-Prussian War. There's a wonderful view, and there are sometimes exhibits here, and is lined up perfectly with the Arc de Triomphe. So I am sorry we took a bit longer than probably we should have, but I could probably talk on every arrondissement for an hour alone. So I hope you've enjoyed our little tour. Again, this is the Seine, and Paris is organized around all these districts. And a quick Cook's tour off the beaten path somewhere.
Kathy, that was fabulous. Thank you very, very much. Now I'm green, and we're going to let me
ask, should I stop share or maybe keep it in case someone wants to go back to something?
I think we should stop share because the presentation will be on YouTube and people can look up their specific things there. So that was really, really wonderful. We have a lot of questions so far. Okay, Susan says, this is so interesting. You made my day. For someone on a budget, what is the best time of year to visit Paris and the best place to stay?
Well, the best time is non-tourist season. October can be a great month. Anytime after Labor Day, prices go down considerably, both in airfare and hotels. So you never know about the weather. I have been there, I think, every month of the year, and I've had fantastic weather in October, and I've had gloomy, rainy weather in October. I've had fabulous weather in April and rainy weather in April. These days, you just don't know. I usually spend the month of May in Paris. It is right before tourist season. You never know. The first 2 weeks one year were rainy and in the 50s, and the last 2 weeks were gorgeous. Some years it's just beautiful. You know, you just roll the dice. The winter is not too bad. It rarely snows. As to hotel, my suggestion would be, if you're going to be there longer than a month, go online and see what apartments are available, because that's the least expensive way to stay. I always rent an apartment if I'm going to be there for at least a week. And again, I think if you can do some research online to see what area you want to be in, that's what I do when I go to Paris. If I'm going to an area, maybe I have business or I want to do some research, I check out the neighborhood and I look online for hotels for my budget.
Okay, great answer. Alice would like to know, what is the status of streets which allow cars in touristy parts of the city?
I'm not sure I know the answer to that because that probably changes, but I can tell you that on Sundays, and I'm not sure if they've done this all the time, in the main part of the city where the quays are, they have cut off traffic to those streets. The street I showed you, his historic Rue Martegoy, is a pedestrian street. In the Marais, there are not so many pedestrian streets, but there are pedestrians in the streets all the time. So you just kind of have to watch for cars. I don't drive in Paris, so I can't tell you exactly which streets are cut off and which aren't. There are places in the Fifth and the Latin Quarter that are pedestrian streets.
Okay. Can you give us a little bit of information on Les Halles?
Halles, Les Halles.
H-A-L, this person spelled it Hallas. Perhaps they
Les
mistyped.
Al. Les Al was a fabulous, I think, all night, all day marketplace made of 19th century iron and glass. It was dismantled in the 60s and moved out outside of Paris, was a wholesale market. It is now, it has been renovated. There used to be a swimming pool in there. I haven't visited in recent years. There's a garden. It's kind of modern, and there are a lot of stores there now that have replaced it. It's been renovated a few times.
Okay.
And it's worth seeing at least once, see the architecture, see the stores. There's nothing special, in my opinion, about the stores there now.
Okay. Susie would like to know, she thanks you. She thought it was wonderful. Do you have the names of tour guides you would recommend?
I don't off the top of my head. I can possibly send Wendy a few. I don't use tour guides, and it depends if you want the tour in English or French. There are plenty. You can have a wine tour. You can have off the beaten path tour. There are a lot of them, and you might even do a search online. I haven't taken tours in a long time.
Okay.
There are, excuse me, incidentally, there are bicycle tours and there are walking tours as well. So you can find just about anything you want.
Okay. I would just like to add a personal observation. I was in Spain. I think I was visiting the Prado, and I splurged on having a personal tour with an English-speaking Spaniard who took me around to see the highlights and why the paintings were important and explain them. And it was so worth it. You know, it's a huge museum. You can't see everything. Sometimes you don't know what you're looking at. If you can afford the splurge, I encourage that wholeheartedly.
Also, the big museums in Paris, they all have tours, and then most of them are free. And they also have the guides, the headphone guides,
right?
Or you use your cell phone and you tap into something about a particular picture. There are lots of tours. There are literary tours also, and all the big museums offer tours.
Okay. People are thanking you. They're planning to visit. Jonathan would like to know, what's the best restaurant?
Well, my choice depends on what you want to eat. Our neighborhood restaurants, there are all these Michelin guide restaurants where if you're a foodie, that's where you should go. My boyfriend's way to figure out whether a restaurant is any good is if it's crowded. And if it's crowded, it's either cheap or it's really good. So read all the restaurants post their menus. I don't have a single favorite. And they're changing all the time. I used to have a favorite where I could get quenelle, and it went out of business. They're always coming and going. So I say read the menu, see what you like, and go in, give it a try.
Okay. I'm not sure I understand this question. Where was that self-cleaning?
Oh, it's Sacré-Cœur. It's the dome of Sacré-Cœur. And, you know, I used to live up there and rent an apartment in the 9th, which is straight down half-hour walk to an office space in the 2nd. And it would take me about 30 minutes to walk home. And sometimes it was late at night. And I'd see the dome shining and I knew I would be close to home. So it was Sacré-Cœur.
Great. Kat mentions another important fact is Paris and Chicago are sister cities.
Chicago is one of my favorite cities too. and the architectural riverboat trip is great. The architectural tour on the river.
Why is this? Why is the city arranged in a circle?
That's the way it grew. It started out on Ile de la Cité and grew to the right bank and the left bank. And for a long, until Napoleon in the 1860s, he started annexing parts outside of Paris. And I would have to do some history on why they annexed this particular district over another. That's the best answer I have at the moment.
Okay. Penny says, what a grand presentation. I've heard it's an expensive place to live. Can you live there for a month on a budget, or am I just dreaming?
No, you can. Depends where you rent an apartment. You definitely can. And if you eat in local restaurants or you buy, food, when I go there for a month, we go to the markets, buy food, stock up, always have breakfast in, because that tends to be expensive in Paris restaurants, even the small ones. Eat breakfast in. I don't eat much lunch. And then, sometimes I just have wine and cheese for dinner with a bottle of wine at home. You can stay there inexpensively. And if you're not in the center of Paris where the tourists are, it's easy to do that. And the rents are less expensive, a lot less expensive. And the rest of Paris is very accessible. They have a great transportation system. Their bus system is great. Their subway, their metro is great. It's easy to get around.
Are you concerned about strikes?
Sometimes. You never know when they're going to strike. We had to get to the airport one year when they were striking. It was a little difficult, but we managed to find a taxi and or arrange a private car. You never know when they're going to strike. May, when we go, there are 4 holidays and everything closes down. They call it the pont. If the holiday is on a Monday or Tuesday and the second holiday is on a Thursday or Friday, they take the whole week off. I mean, you never know with Paris. They have a strike, you can't stop it. It's just serendipitous if you happen to avoid one.
Okay.
They're always striking, demonstrating.
Faye asks, is Paris the only city that has a building with those beautiful glass domes?
I suspect not, but I don't really know the answer because I haven't done any research or
And what material holds the glass structure together?
It's ironwork generally.
Okay. People are asking, is this information compiled from your books?
It's compiled from the books and other research and just walking the streets. I have walked the streets and the districts of Paris. I have probably been where many Parisians haven't been. So it's a combination, just a combination of a lot of different things.
Recommendations for shopping. That's what Caroline wants to know.
Well, there is a term in French called the flaneur, a wanderer. That's what I am. There are the major department stores. I showed you just the one, Bon Marché, but there's also Au Printemps and Galerie Lafayette, which I'm sure you've heard of. Both of those are in the 9th arrondissement. And if it's a department store you're looking for, that's where you should go. There are the covered markets, the covered passageways. There's one that only sells toys. There's one that has craft shops. I mean, they're all over Paris. But my idea of fun is wandering areas like Le Marais or around Luxembourg Gardens in the 6th and then in the 7th, where you just wander down the street and you look at, you window shop. They call it l'air vitrine, licking the windows. Window shop, and you see a store you like, you walk in. That's how I've shopped all my life. I'm a great shopper for museum stores, but for myself, I just like roaming, and I see something in a window that calls to me, and that's when I go into it. So just roam around Paris.
Okay. Michelle would like to know, how is medical care there? Is it needed? Is it easy to access?
If you go into almost any pharmacy and you're really sick, they will tell you where to go. But they'll also, if you bring a prescription from home and they know you're a tourist, they will very often fill it for you without a doctor's prescription. And everything is very inexpensive in a pharmacy. If I bought something here, with a prescription, it was $150. I walked into a pharmacy there, it was $5, €5, 5 to 10 euros. So medicine is inexpensive, and so are the visits to doctors if you need one.
Okay.
Whoops, you froze. Can you hear me? I'm not hearing anything.
To
Okay.
Paris once COVID ends and they're allowed.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you because it froze. The screen froze for a minute.
Okay. There are many compliments, which I will forward to you. People are looking forward to going back to Paris or to visiting Paris for the first time.
I missed my month there this year.
John recommends a great book, Paris, A Love Story by Katie Martin.
Oh, great.
Let's see. Suzanne would like to know, do you recommend Airbnb for finding an apartment?
Yeah, I think you have to decide where you want to be. I have not used an Airbnb before. The studio that I rented near Montmartre, I got through a friend, and we have found other apartments in different neighborhoods just by going online. On a vacation, there's a VRBO, vacation rentals by owner. That's a very good site.
Okay. And for people with meal restrictions, whether kosher, vegan, vegetarian, where should they go for that information?
I do a search online. That one place in Le Marais on Rue de Rassier, Las Falafel. My son was a vegan when he happened to be in Paris. He ate there, I think, every night. Paris has a lot more restaurants that have vegetarian choices now than they ever did, not even when I was writing the book. And there's a lot of ethnic restaurants. You can go eat Italian, Chinese, Japanese. So you can find the kind of food you're looking for.
Okay. Carol would like to know, how is the restoration of Notre Dame coming along?
That is a long story. They took, I don't know if you noticed the scaffolding, it took them a year to clean up the debris, nearly a year. I think it was 11 months and shore up the cathedral, because when I went to visit, it was cordoned off. You couldn't get anywhere near it. So they've taken a long time to clean it up, and they are just beginning to do renovation on it. And there was a big controversy, should it be built exactly as it was, or should it be built more modern? I'm not a traditionalist in that sense, because Notre Dame changed over the years numerous times. It wasn't the first fire, it wasn't the first spire. It's had modifications, and it's not so Gothic as you think. Most of it comes from the 19th century and the architect Viollet-le-Duc. And I think that he would create something modern that gave you a sense of the past. However, they have recently decided to go with traditional and build it exactly the way it was. They're not asking my opinion, but if they asked Viollet-le-Duc, he would probably say something modern with a sense of history attached to it. They say it's going to be ready for the Olympics in, what is it, in 2024. That's going to be interesting to see if they can make it by then, because there's a lot of work to do still on shoring up and making sure it's not going to fall down, even the western wall.
Okay. Lynn would like to know, what is your favorite arrondissement and why?
Well, it's interesting. I loved always being in the center of Paris. I've rented apartments in the 6th, in the 3rd, in the 4th, in the 11th, in the 18th. And more recently, we've rented the same apartment in the 16th. I didn't think I'd like it. I thought it would be super boring. I showed you a lot of images from the 16th that I have discovered from living there for a month. It's very residential, but there's so much there. There's even an enclave of Jewish, there's a synagogue there. I've come to love that area, and it's only a half hour by metro or bus to the center of Paris. So I guess you'd say I love the 16th now, but I also love the 6th with Luxembourg Gardens and being in the center of Paris and Le Marais. I don't have a single one place, though most Parisians do. I have a friend who's lived there for 23 years, and she said that I am so unusual because I keep changing neighborhoods. She said most people live in the same neighborhood and rarely go out of their neighborhood. So you just have to see what appeals to you. And at first, as I said, I thought the 16th would be super boring, but I've come to love it.
Okay. Charlene asked a question. She was reminded seeing the illumination of a woman in gold, that it was a recovered painting. Are there other recovered paintings in Paris museums?
Oh, I'm sure there are. One of the interesting little side rooms in the Louvre has paintings that were confiscated by Jewish owners, and they it's really sad that they only devote this little space to it. It takes a long time to find it there. There have been many paintings that have been recovered.
Kathy?
Yeah, can you hear me? Did it freeze?
Yes, it froze for me, but it's not freezing for others.
So there are many recovered paintings from various places, not the least of which are all, Jewish homes where they haven't been able to find the heirs. And there is this one little room in the Louvre which you can see some of the paintings that haven't been claimed. But it's a mystery. The Stuart Gardner Museum in Boston, the theft, those paintings still haven't been reclaimed.
Right.
Who's found them? So.
That's it for questions. I would like to add, Kathy and I talked about this last night, and visiting the Arc de Triomphe at night, we think is one of the most essential things you need to do. The views are stunning. You can't believe it. I cried the first time I saw it. It is just so magnificent. And it's the City of Lights. It's just wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you, Abidur, for sponsoring. Next week, we have a very important presentation. We are going to be discussing the murder of Emmett Till 65 years ago next week with the author of the book. He co-wrote it with Emmett's mother, and how people are perceiving it as a bookend with George Floyd's murder. So it's going to be a very, very interesting discussion. The book that Christopher Benson wrote with Mamie Till is available for sale at Booked Evanston. You can order it online. They're giving discounts, and it's pickup only. The store is too small to allow people in. Thank you so much, Kathy. It was fabulous. It was really wonderful. It felt like we weren't even here for an hour.
Almost in Paris.
Almost in Paris. Armchair travel. Thank you, everyone. We will see you next week. Have a good week. Stay safe.
Thanks, Wendy.